Ma'am, with all due respect, this is a kill house, not a knitting circle. Why don't you stand back before you break a nail? The words, slick with condescension, slid from Gunnery Sergeant Rourke's mouth and hung in the oppressive, humid air of the training bay. The crowd of young Marine recruits, barely men, shifted on their feet. A few snickered, low and nervous, their eyes darting between the towering, barrel-chested instructor and the woman he was addressing. She was a ghost in the corner of the cavernous concrete room, a place that smelled of sweat, CLP solvent, and fear. Her simple, unmarked fatigues were clean but faded, fitting her in a way that suggested function over form. She was of average height, with a wiry build that the loose fabric did little to define. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, functional bun, and her face was a study in neutrality, giving away nothing. She stood with a stillness that was deeply unsettling, a rock in the churning river of testosterone and anxiety that defined this place. She did not react. Her gaze, steady and unervingly calm, remained fixed on the recruits as they prepared their gear. She didn't flinch, didn't sigh, didn't so much as blink at the insult. This lack of reaction seemed to infuriate Rourke more than any retort could have. He was a man who thrived on friction, who sharpened his authority on the sparks of confrontation. Her silence was a vacuum, and it pulled at his ego. From the elevated gantry that overlooked the kill house, a lone figure watched the exchange. Colonel Davies, the base commander, stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his expression grim. He saw Rourke's peacocking display, the cheap shot aimed at an easy target. But when the colonel saw her stance, he saw something else entirely. He saw the subtle, almost imperceptible blade of her body, the way her weight was perfectly centered, her feet precisely shoulder-width apart. It wasn't the posture of a bureaucrat or a civilian observer. It was the coiled readiness of a predator, so deeply ingrained it had become her state of rest. A memory stirred in the colonel's mind, a classified briefing from years ago about a new Tier 1 evaluation program. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. The recruits, taking their cue from their gunny, saw only a quiet woman who was out of her depth. They saw what they were told to see. They saw a problem. They had no idea that the problem was, in fact, their own assumption, a fatal error in judgment that was about to be corrected with devastating clarity. If you believe true strength doesn't need to announce itself, type silence below. This was more than just another training day. It was becoming a classroom, and a lesson in humility was about to be delivered not with a lecture, but with a demonstration of absolute, undeniable competence. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable collision between loud arrogance and quiet, lethal professionalism. The silence from the woman was not emptiness. It was a promise. Gunnery Sergeant Rourke, emboldened by her continued silence, decided to press his advantage. He saw her passivity not as discipline, but as weakness, and he intended to use it as a tool. He strode over to his recruits, clapping a hand on the shoulder of a nervous-looking private. "Listen up, Marines," he boomed, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. He gestured dismissively toward the woman. "You see this? This is what complacency looks like. This is what you'll find back on the FOB. People who don't understand our world. People who think this is all a game." He paced before them, a caged tiger radiating contempt. "The enemy hopes you are this soft. They pray you are this distracted. They want you to be more concerned with hurting someone's feelings than with putting rounds on target." He stopped and turned his full attention back to her, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. "Ma'am, what's the optimal breach point on a standard right-hand inward-swinging door with a reinforced frame?" The question was technical, designed to expose her ignorance. The recruits stared, waiting for her to stammer or admit defeat. The woman, who had been observing the team's magazine check, slowly lifted her head. Her eyes met Rourke's. They were dark, deep-set, and held a placid intensity that was like looking into the calm sea just before a tsunami. She said nothing. She simply held his gaze for a beat longer than was comfortable, then returned her attention to the recruit's gear. Her silence was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. It offered no purchase for his aggression, no fuel for his fire. It simply was. Rourke's face flushed a dull red. He had expected fear, or anger, or at least a fumbling attempt to answer. The utter lack of engagement was a public refutation of his power. He felt his authority slipping in front of his men. No answer? Figures, he scoffed, turning back to his squad. That's what I thought. Look, just stay behind the yellow line. We're running live-fire simulations. Wouldn't want you to get a boo-boo. The recruits shuffled, their earlier amusement now tinged with a shared discomfort. They were young, their identities still being forged in the crucible of this training, and their loyalty was to the gunny. They saw his public humiliation of the observer as a display of strength, a tribal reinforcement of their own elite status. They failed to see the brittleness of his confidence, the desperate need for validation that underpinned his every word. They were being taught a lesson, but it wasn't the one Rourke intended. They were learning to equate noise with knowledge and arrogance with ability. And in their line of work, that was a lesson that could get them killed. Up on the gantry, Colonel Davies sighed, a low, weary sound. He knew Rourke was a good instructor in many ways, tough, demanding, technically proficient. But he had a blind spot, a prejudice that this quiet woman was now mercilessly exposing, whether she intended to or not. The exercise was about to begin. The stage was set. The players had their roles. And the quiet professional in the corner simply waited, a silent arbiter of a truth that was about to become violently self-evident. The command came crackling over the comms, Rourke's voice tight with manufactured intensity. Execute, execute, execute. The stack of 6 Marines, a riot of adrenaline and freshly learned procedure, surged toward the door of the kill house. The breacher, a thick-necked corporal, slammed a miniature ram into the door with more enthusiasm than technique. The plywood frame splintered, and they poured inside, a clumsy cascade of green uniforms and black rifles. They were loud. Their shouted commands, clear left, clear right, moving, were a frantic cacophony that broadcasted their every intention. Their movements were jerky, overwrought, each man trying so hard to embody the aggressive ideal Rourke had preached that they sacrificed fluidity and tactical sense. From her position near the entry point, the woman watched. Her perception was a high-fidelity recording of the unfolding disaster. She saw the lead Marine sweep his muzzle past a teammate's leg. She saw the second man fail to properly scan his corner, his eyes fixated on the paper target directly in front of him. She saw the way their spacing collapsed as they bunched up in the first narrow hallway, creating a perfect, tangled target for a single, well-placed burst of fire. She saw everything. Her calm was not detachment. It was a state of heightened awareness, a complete absorption of sensory data, without the filter of emotion. She processed the scene not as a chaotic series of events, but as a flow chart of branching failures. Each misstep was a data point, each shouted command a diagnostic signal of their lack of cohesion. On the comms, Rourke's voice was a running commentary of frustration. Damn it, Miller, watch your sector. Hughes, get your spacing. You're bunched up like tourists. His corrections were a beat behind the action, his anger a poor substitute for the calm guidance his team actually needed. The recruits, rattled by the complexity of the scenario and their instructor's growing fury, began to make more mistakes. They bypassed a closed door without checking it, a fatal rookie error. They engaged targets with sloppy trigger discipline, sending simunition rounds zipping wildly into the backstop walls. Inside the kill house, the air was thick with the smell of discharged rounds, a scent like burnt plastic and popcorn. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light cutting through the simulated windows, each one a tiny spotlight on the unfolding chaos. The woman remained at her post, a silent observer to the controlled demolition of a fire team's confidence. Her posture hadn't changed, but a subtle shift had occurred. Her focus was now absolute. She was no longer just watching. She was analyzing, calculating, anticipating the next point of failure. She tracked the position of every recruit, every hostile role player, every potential crossfire. She was running a parallel simulation in her mind, a silent, perfect execution of the same problem, and the gap between her internal run-through and the reality playing out before her was a chasm. She knew, with the certainty of a mathematician solving an equation, that the exercise was moments away from its critical breaking point. The breaking point arrived with the suddenness of a lightning strike. The team cleared the main room and pushed toward the final chamber, designated as the hostage room. Corporal Green, the youngest on the team, was on point. He kicked open the door and charged in, his rifle held high. Inside, a single role player stood with his hands up, playing the part of a compliant hostage. But in the far corner, another instructor, the primary hostile, was concealed behind a stack of oil drums. As Green rushed in, focusing on the obvious hostage, the hostile actor popped up and fired a burst of red simunition rounds that stitched across Green's chest plate. "You're hit, Green. You're dead," the evaluator's voice boomed over the loudspeaker. Panic flared in the young Marine's eyes. His training evaporated, replaced by a primal surge of confusion and failure. He had been killed in front of his peers, in front of the gunny. Humiliation washed over him. He spun around, disoriented, his rifle swinging in a wide, uncontrolled arc. His teammates were still funneling into the room behind him. Rourke's voice erupted over the comms, a furious, desperate roar. "Green, control your weapon." But Corporal Green didn't hear him. His world had shrunk to the sting of the sim rounds and the shame of his mistake. And his swinging rifle barrel, still aimed high in an aggressive posture, swept past the other role player, past his teammates, and settled directly on the quiet woman, who had moved with liquid silence from the entrance to a flanking observation position along the room's left wall. For a frozen second, time itself seemed to fracture. Everyone saw it. The recruits saw a terrified kid pointing a weapon where it should never, ever be pointed. Rourke, his face ashen on the monitor in the control room, saw a catastrophic safety violation that could end his career. Colonel Davies, on the gantry, leaned forward, his knuckles white where he gripped the railing. He saw the inevitable. The woman saw the muzzle of the M4 training rifle, a black circle of unacceptable risk. She saw the recruit's finger, tense and trembling on the trigger. She saw the failure of training, leadership, and discipline all culminating in this single, unforgivable moment. Then she moved. It was not a human movement. It was the blur of a falcon stooping, the explosive efficiency of a piston firing. There was no thought, only action. One moment she was standing 10 feet away, a static figure of calm. The next, she was inside Green's guard. Her left hand, moving too fast to track, deflected the rifle upwards and away. Simultaneously, her right hand struck the weapon's magazine release, dropping the source of ammunition harmlessly to the floor. Her body flowed around the recruits, using his own forward momentum against him. A precise, controlled motion twisted the rifle from his grasp. In the same fluid sequence, she racked the charging handle, ejecting the chambered sim round, and brought the weapon to her own shoulder. The entire disarm took less than a second. Before Green had even registered that his hands were empty, she had already pivoted. Two hostiles remained in the room, role players who were now frozen in astonishment. Pop pop. Two perfectly placed shots, fired from the hip as she moved, struck the center mass of each paper target taped to their chests. The sound was deafening in the sudden, absolute silence. She cleared the rifle, made it safe, and stood in the center of the room, the weapon held at a low ready. Corporal Green was stumbling backward, his face a mask of pure shock. The other recruits were statues, their mouths agape. Rourke was silent on the comms. The exercise was over. The lesson had just begun. The silence that fell over the kill house was profound, a physical weight that pressed down on everyone inside. It was broken only by the sound of a single pair of boots descending the metal stairs from the gentry. Colonel Davies walked onto the floor, his expression unreadable, carved from granite. The metallic clang of his steps on the concrete seemed to measure out the gravity of the moment. He didn't look at the stunned recruits. He didn't look at the pale-faced evaluators. He walked past the still trembling Corporal Green without a glance. His path was direct, his focus singular. He stopped a few feet in front of the woman, who still held the cleared training rifle in a perfect low-ready stance. The air crackled with unspoken tension. The entire base, it seemed, was holding its breath. Rourke's voice finally came over the loudspeaker. Not a boom, but a strangled whisper. "Stand down." Exercise terminated, but no one moved. All eyes were on the colonel and the quiet woman. Davies surveyed the scene. The disarmed recruit, the perfectly neutralized targets, the woman's flawless tactical posture. He gave a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture of profound acknowledgement. Then he spoke, his voice calm, but carrying an authority that cut through the thick atmosphere of shock. "Report, Senior Chief." The words dropped like stones into a silent pool. Senior Chief. The rank was Navy, not Marine. And it was a senior non-commissioned officer rank, a title earned through decades of service and leadership, a title that commanded immediate, unwavering respect. The recruits exchanged bewildered glances. Gunnery Sergeant Rourke, watching from the control booth, felt a cold dread wash over him. He had not been mocking a civilian. He had been publicly insulting a senior NCO from a sister service. The woman finally broke her silence. Her voice, when it came, was exactly like her movements, economical, precise, and devoid of any wasted energy. Recruit Fire Team demonstrated critical failure in command and control, tactical movement, and weapons discipline, sir. Breached without intelligence, collapsed spacing in the fatal funnel, and bypassed a potential threat area. Final Man experienced a critical loss of situational awareness, resulting in a blue-on-blue threat condition and a direct safety violation. I intervened to regain control of the weapon and neutralize the remaining hostile targets. Room is now secure. Her report was a clinical, brutal assessment of their failure. There was no emotion in it. No "I told you so," no hint of vindication. It was the detached, professional analysis of an expert. It was more damning than any insult could ever be. Rourke felt the floor drop out from beneath him. He had built his entire identity around being the toughest, most knowledgeable warrior in the room. In the space of 3 seconds, this quiet, unassuming woman had demonstrated a level of skill and composure that he could only dream of. He had mocked her for being a knitter in a kill house, and she had just rewoven the entire fabric of his reality. Colonel Davies let her report hang in the air, allowing its clinical weight to settle on every person present. He then turned his gaze, cold and deliberate, toward the glass of the control booth where he knew Gunnery Sergeant Rourke was standing, paralyzed. Gunnery Sergeant Rourke. The colonel's voice was now laced with ice, amplified by the PA system for all to hear. "You seem to have some questions about our guest qualifications. Allow me to clarify them for you." The colonel produced a ruggedized military tablet from a pouch on his belt. With a few sharp taps of his finger, he brought up a file. He held it up, not for Rourke, but for the benefit of the recruits who were now staring at him, their young faces a mixture of awe and dawning shame. "Let the record show," Davies began, his voice ringing with the finality of a judge passing sentence, "that our observer is Senior Chief Petty Officer Anya Sharma of the United States Navy." He paused, letting the name and rank sink in. Then he began to read. "Unit, Naval Special Warfare Development Group." A collective gasp went through the recruits. DevGru, SEAL Team 6. The unit was the stuff of legend, a name spoken only in hushed, reverent tones. They were ghosts, operators at the absolute apex of the special operations world. Senior Chief Sharma is the lead instructor for advanced close quarters combat and hostage rescue operations at Dam Neck. She is the architect of the very doctrine your manuals are based on. Gunny Rourke visibly flinched behind the glass. The colonel continued, his voice a relentless hammer of facts. Her operational record includes, he paused, scrolling down the screen. Frankly, most of it I'm not clear to read aloud in an open room. But I can tell you it includes over 200 direct action missions in hostile territory. Recipient of the Silver Star for actions during Operation Phantom Fury. Recipient of the Navy Cross for gallantry during a hostage rescue in the Horn of Africa, where she single-handedly neutralized 12 enemy combatants after the rest of her team was incapacitated. The list went on. Expert qualifications in every weapon system in the NATO inventory. Master-level certifications in halo jumping, combat diving, and tactical demolitions. Language proficiency in 4 languages. She is here, Gunnery Sergeant. The colonel concluded, his eyes boring into the control booth, and my personal invitation to conduct a cross-branch evaluation of our Tier 1 training pipeline readiness. She is not a guest. She is the standard. He powered down the tablet. The silence that returned was different now. It was filled with a profound, bone-deep respect. The recruits looked at Senior Chief Sharma not as a woman, but as a living legend. They finally understood her stillness, her silence. It wasn't passivity. It was the calm at the eye of a hurricane. Then, Colonel Davies did something that sent a shockwave through the room. He turned to face Sharma. He drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight. In a motion that was crisp, powerful, and steeped in tradition, the full-bird colonel of the United States Marine Corps rendered a perfect, formal salute to the Navy's senior chief petty officer. It was a gesture that broke every rule of inter-service protocol, a public display of deference from a high-ranking commissioned officer to a senior enlisted NCO. It was the ultimate sign of respect, an apology, and a coronation all in one. Sharma, in response, simply nodded her head, a quiet acknowledgement. For her, the validation was not in the salute or the recitation of a record. The validation was in the work, and the work was done. The dismissal was a formality. The recruits filed out of the kill house not with the usual boisterous energy of young men released from a hard day's work, but in a state of stunned, contemplative silence. They walked back toward the barracks in small, tight clusters, the usual shouting and joking replaced by low, urgent whispers. The story of what had happened was already beginning its journey, spreading from man to man, from squad bay to chow hall, transforming from an event into a legend. It moved like wildfire through the dry grass of the base's gossip network. They talked about her silence. They talked about her speed. They talked about the way she moved not like a person, but like an idea, a physical manifestation of lethal competence. They described the disarm, each retelling adding a thin new layer of myth, until the act seemed less like a feat of training and more like a moment of pure, supernatural grace. By the time the sun set, every Marine on the depot, from the greenest private to the most grizzled master sergeant, had heard the story of the quiet Navy chief who had humbled Gunnery Sergeant Rourke and rewritten the definition of a warrior. Rourke himself was the last to leave the training bay. He stood alone in the control booth for a long time, watching the security footage on a repeating loop. He saw his own arrogance, his condescending words, his smug smile. Then he saw her move. He watched it 10 times, then 20. He slowed it down frame by frame, trying to comprehend the sheer economy of motion, the impossible efficiency. There was no wasted energy, no theatrical flair. It was pure, distilled violence of action, executed with the calm precision of a surgeon. A deep, profound shame washed over him, a feeling so potent it made him physically ill. He had not only been wrong, he had been a fool. He had wrapped himself in the superficial trappings of toughness, the loud voice, the aggressive posture, the public condescension, and had completely missed the quiet, unassailable reality of true strength standing right in front of him. He found Senior Chief Sharma by the armory, where she was calmly field stripping and cleaning the M4 training rifle she had taken from Corporal Green. She worked with the same methodical focus she did everything else, her hands moving with a practiced, intimate knowledge of the machine. Rourke stopped a few feet away, his hands shoved awkwardly in his pockets. The bravado was gone, stripped away, leaving behind a humble, diminished man. "Senior Chief," he began, his voice raspy. She didn't look up, but her hands paused. I was wrong," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "There is no excuse for my conduct. For my words, I was unprofessional, and I was disrespectful. I apologize." He stood there, exposed and waiting for her judgment. Sharma finished reassembling the rifle's bolt carrier group, the metallic clicks echoing in the quiet room. She finally looked up at him, her dark eyes holding his for a moment. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. That was all. No lecture, no recrimination. The lesson had already been delivered. The apology was for his benefit, not hers. She had nothing to prove, and therefore, nothing to forgive. She turned back to her work, her silence once again speaking volumes, conveying a simple, powerful truth. The action was the only thing that mattered. The ripples of that day spread far beyond the base gossip mill. The event became a catalyst for genuine change. Gunnery Sergeant Rourke, to his credit, did not crumble under the weight of his humiliation. He absorbed it. He learned from it. The next morning, he stood before a new class of recruits. The booming, arrogant instructor was gone, replaced by a more thoughtful, more measured man. His first lecture was not about aggression or enemy mindset. It was about the danger of assumptions. He told them the story of Senior Chief Anya Sharma, not sparing himself in the telling. He detailed his own prejudice, his own ignorance, with brutal honesty. I saw a quiet woman, he told them, his voice raw. I failed to see the warrior. I looked, but I did not see. That failure of perception is the single most dangerous threat you will ever face on the battlefield. It will get you killed faster than any bullet. He then played the security footage from the kill house. He pointed to her stance before the exercise began. Look here, he said, his voice filled with a newfound reverence. This is what calm competence looks like. This is strength that doesn't need to shout. This is the standard you will be held to. The story became institutional folklore, a cautionary tale for new instructors and a source of inspiration for the recruits. The training bay itself was unofficially renamed Sharma House by the Marines who trained there. A few weeks after the incident, a small, unassuming package arrived at the base, addressed to Colonel Davies. Inside was a single, red-tipped simunition casing, mounted on a simple block of dark wood. A small brass plaque was affixed below it. It didn't bear her name or rank. It had only 2 words engraved on it. Assume nothing, Davies had the plaque mounted on the wall of the kill house control room, just above the main monitor. It became a permanent fixture, a constant, silent reminder. The culture of the training program began to shift. The emphasis moved subtly from pure, unrestrained aggression to a more disciplined, thoughtful approach to tactical problems. Rourke started incorporating lessons on observation, emotional control, and the importance of questioning one's own biases. He taught his Marines that the most dangerous enemy wasn't the one making the most noise, but the one you failed to notice. Senior Chief Sharma never returned to the base. Her evaluation was complete, but her presence lingered, a ghost of professionalism that haunted the training grounds in the best possible way. She had come and gone with the quiet efficiency of a tide, and in her wake, she had reshaped the entire landscape. Her legacy wasn't in a name on a building or a story told in a bar. It was in the improved training of 1,000 Marines, in the quiet competence she had modeled, and in the profound, enduring lesson that true worth is measured not in words, but in deeds. A year later, on a dusty, sun-baked patrol base in a forgotten corner of Afghanistan, a young Marine squad leader gathered his team for a final pre-mission brief. It was Corporal Green. The year had transformed him. The scared, trembling recruit from the kill house was gone, replaced by a quiet, confident NCO who carried the weight of his responsibilities with a maturity beyond his years. His movements were calm and deliberate, his voice low but firm. He looked each of his Marines in the eye, their faces tense with anticipation under the harsh glare of the fluorescent lights in the tent. They were about to step outside the wire, into a world of lethal uncertainty. After covering the tactical details, routes, rally points, rules of engagement, he paused. One last thing, he said, his gaze sweeping over his team. Before we go, I want to tell you a story. He told them about a day back in training. He told them about a gunnery sergeant who believed strength was loud, and a quiet observer who proved him wrong. He told them about his own failure, the moment of panic when he had lost control of his weapon and his discipline. He described, with a reverence that still resonated in his voice, the impossible speed and grace of the woman who had disarmed him. Her name was Senior Chief Anya Sharma, he said. She was a Navy SEAL. She was the quietest person I have ever met. And she was, without a doubt, the most dangerous. He let that sink in. She taught me the most important lesson of my career. Your value isn't in how loud you talk or how tough you look. It's not in the patches on your uniform or the stories you tell. It's in one thing and one thing only, how well you do your job when it matters. It's about being a quiet professional. He saw the understanding dawning on his Marines' faces. The story wasn't just a story, it was their ethos. It was a parable that defined the kind of warriors he was trying to build. Out there tonight, he continued, gesturing toward the tent flap. You're going to be scared. Your adrenaline is going to be pumping. Don't let the noise in your head take over. Be calm. Be deliberate. Be the quiet professional. See everything. Assume nothing. That's how we do our job. That's how we all come home. The legacy of Senior Chief Sharma was not a plaque on a wall thousands of miles away. It was here, in this tent, in the heart of a young leader. It was a living principle, a code of conduct being passed from one warrior to the next. Her single act of quiet competence had not just ended a training exercise. It had forged a philosophy that was now being carried into combat, a silent, protective shield of discipline and humility. The ripples from that day continued to spread, creating more quiet professionals, ready to do the hard work without needing the applause. That was her true, enduring victory. Respect is a mirror. It does not reflect what is demanded, but what is demonstrated. It is not found in the thunder of a boast, but in the silent echo of a perfect action. On a hot, forgotten training day, a group of young men learned this truth in the most visceral way imaginable. They witnessed the collision of two opposing philosophies: the brittle, loud arrogance that demands respect as its right, and the quiet, unyielding competence that earns it as a consequence. Gunnery Sergeant Rourke believed his rank, his voice, and his position granted him authority. He saw a world of hierarchies and superficial judgments, and he used insults as a tool to reinforce his place within it. Senior Chief Anya Sharma, however, operated in a different reality altogether. Her world was governed not by perception, but by performance. For her, authority was not a function of volume, but of ability. Her silence was not a weakness. It was a discipline, a deliberate conservation of energy for the only thing that truly mattered, the decisive moment. The kill house became more than a training ground that day. It became a crucible of character. It proved that true strength is not the ability to intimidate, but the capacity to remain calm under pressure. True skill does not need to announce its own arrival. Its results speak with a clarity that no boast can ever match. The most dangerous person in any room is rarely the one making the most noise. It is the one who is observing, analyzing, and waiting. It is the one whose confidence is so deeply seated that it requires no external validation. It is the quiet professional. The story of that day became a teaching tool, a piece of institutional folklore reminding a new generation that assumptions are the enemy of survival, and that humility is the bedrock of true strength. It served as a permanent reminder that you can never truly know the history, the skill, or the steel that resides behind a quiet set of eyes. A legacy is not what is carved in stone, but what is woven into the actions of those who come after. The true measure of Anya Sharma's impact was not in the medals she wore or the files that detailed her exploits, but in the quiet competence she inspired in a young corporal who carried her lesson from a concrete training bay to the dusty frontiers of a war zone. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.